you can actually even click on the followers and it'll tell you amount of income, the male versus female, all of that analytics is free. And if you're not looking at that analytics, that free ones, and deciding, ooh, what can I tweak? What actions can I take with this? If you can't look at that and see that as data they're providing and analytics that allow you to take actions, I don't think you should go get any tool for analytics. I think the start has to be on this and say, this is the data they're providing me. Although it's kind of high level and not super tweakable, there are plenty of things that you can learn in this free Twitter analytics tool that would allow you to be a better small business, serve your community better, understand your tweets. For me, I'll sometimes go in there and, total impressions, 50,000 followers, and I'll see like one tweet saw 400 people. And I'm like, well, that's interesting. Well, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to tweet it again, not because I thought it was bad, but because apparently I hit like a section where everybody decided to go follow a different hashtag or wasn't looking at their feed. And I think too often we're discrediting something without looking at these analytics and making a decision on it. I know, that was really the point of our show when we started this was we want people to take action. And oftentimes those actions are realizing that the tool isn't what you need. You need to start your strategy and philosophy over again.
Not only that, but you can use native analytics to validate another tool that you're testing. Because I'm kind of a trust but verify kind of girl. So I will actually, maybe pull just like a little sample and go, okay, does this kind of mesh with what this tool is telling me? Okay, you're okay so far, so I'll give you a try, Because I have tried tools where it didn't necessarily, and that's not to say that the tool was wrong, but if I couldn't be sure, then I moved on to the next one.
Yeah, it is always interesting to run tools side by side. I know using Summall and then comparing that data to native Twitter or whatever. It's always interesting. They're never exactly the same. You just kind of got to go with whatever works for you, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Well, and one of the things I'm working on right now on my website is actually my first downloadable white paper that is actually going to have a call to action. So you have to sign up for my newsletter to get it. And for me, I'm crafting up the process that I go into before I do a Periscope live stream. And how I leverage BuzzSumo, and how I look at trending topics on Twitter, how I look at a Twitter list and understand what my audience is kind of discussing, and then how I reverse engineer. Okay, did that time work? Was the content the problem, the engagement the problem, me the problem, or and kind of tweaking and adjusting it and running those those reverse engineered analytics. And you can do that even though I saw Casey was in here earlier, and I know Casey and a couple companies right now are working on Periscope analytics. And Periscope doesn't give you analytics right now, but I'm actually able to take that and give from the amount of things that it gives me, able to make predictions and adjustments based on that data to start tweaking without having to have a full analytics program. So I actually think that's interesting. And then a comment here, I wanted, Rachel, I was curious your thoughts. Shoshana had actually said, studying people's emotions, you have to take that into account, and it's important to know what people are doing offline as well. I kind of have an interesting thought on that, kind of where data falls in. What are your thoughts on kind of the human context on when it comes to analytics, especially in social?
Well, I think if you're a brand, sentiment for your community is key. I think a lot of people don't moderate that as well as they could. There are tools for that now. But offline, I guess I'm not sure what the question is.
Well, it's the idea that sometimes, I do believe you can make data tell you what you want data to see. You also can look at data and half full or half empty, depending on what you want, right? Someone can look at something and saying, 15,000 people saw your tweet, only 4 people clicked the link. That's a crappy tweet. Yet if you look at the 4 people that saw that tweet and said, those are 3 of my targeted CIO influencers that I was strategically going at, that's my most successful tweet of the week. And I think by looking at that, I understand understanding human, the human factor and what works online and offline. But for me, and I think this is something that I think every social media post that you have could have a different strategy and goal and should be measured against that strategy and goal more so than anything else. Because I'll hear someone say well, I posted this to get word of mouth and shares. That's why I don't care about the click-throughs. Well, what's the word of mouth and shares that you got on that? How does that benchmark against other posts that you did at the similar concept, right? And if you're not doing that apples to apples, you're never going to judge. You're never going to be able to compare a post and kind of do that across the board. I think that's kind of my thoughts on kind of, I believe in context, but I also believe that you have to truly understand what you're asking and what you're pointing, what your strategy is for each one of those posts.
Right. And a healthy social media strategy should contain all of that. Obviously, you need to increase your impressions. You need that amplifying aspect. And then you want to drive traffic. You need those commit acts to, because that equals dollar signs. So there should be a healthy dose of both, and you should, compare apples to apples for sure.
Can I add something? I also think that we've come a long way with our capabilities with tools. And when you're a huge brand, you need something that can analyze sentiment because, scale obviously is an issue. But there is really no substitute for your own eyes and your own brain because there isn't a tool yet that I think nails all of that. For example, earlier I referred to Rachel as dope, which I meant in a complimentary fashion, but that would not show up accordingly on just a tool. That's where somebody's eyes looking at something.
No, but that's where you would use like Sysomos or Zoom for that matter. You put in keywords that are good for your brand. So if you're a skate brand and someone uses dope, that's a huge thumbs up. That sentiment's through the roof. But if you're, in healthcare and someone's talking about dope, perhaps not the same context. So it's just about, again, best fit, personalizing, and you get that data.
Doritos in the Super Bowl, right? They posted the hashtag and said, let us know your thoughts on this football game using the hashtag whatever the hell Doritos came up with, right? And most people put in there, their comments, but a lot of them put the Steelers suck. But I love this the game. Kudos to you, Doritos. Whatever. And so it's a negative sentiment towards something. But I think if you're asking the question and prompting people, you have to also kind of shape it so you kind of leave, don't send yourself down that path. And then I wanted to bring this in. I think I love this conversation and dialogue. And thank you everybody who's tweeting it out. I just changed the title to thank you to Buffer and Kevin Lee for leading the way and joining. So if you just hit Tell a Little Bird, they're awesome and engaging and listening and always been, great. They have an awesome Twitter chat as well. And they were, to me, this is one of the things that people don't realize is that when you're a powerful brand and you're leading the way and you're doing these things, oftentimes you would think they're disconnected. Maybe they believe they know everything. I can tell you, I've had numerous calls with the executives at Buffer asking me for feedback as a power user. I had Nicole reach out to me and say, Brian, you and Rachel are running the best Twitter chat out there. What's some lessons learned that I could use creating Buffer chat? And to me, when a brand's willing to do that and listen and ask their audience and engage and do a lot of these things that other companies aren't really willing to do, to me, really is something that's, kind of turns into an interesting conversation. But I wanted to bring this up, and I thought this was a really cool point, maybe wraps a bow on everything we're talking about. Citizen Vine, who tweeted or posted here in the comments, he said, he was talking about our conversation about tools and analytics and all of that, and said, sometimes this can go against who you are as a person. It's such a tough blend. So what are you guys' thoughts on what the person you are, the story you're telling, the tools and automation you're using? How does that, is that a tough blend or do we need to have to kind of reapproach it? What are your thoughts on that kind of comment? I'd love to hear from both of you on that.
No, for me, I think social media tools help you tell your story better and to tell it to people who are interested in hearing it. And it's great. I was reading those tweets too. And I think, yes, your story should play a huge role in your strategy. But again, you need to leverage available tools to amplify your story and craft your messaging to reach your audience. Because you can have a great story, but if you're not using tools properly, no one's going to hear it. So, so you can stand on a street corner and yell it out. But I think, we're smart. We can leverage available technologies.
Exactly. The tools help you determine if you're getting traction, or maybe you think you're saying one thing, but everybody on the other end is hearing something else. That's where the tools can come in and help you. Doesn't mean that you have to change what your message is. It might change how you're communicating it.
And I'll tell anybody that's out there, whatever social platform you're on, anybody who's using a tool or someone that you respect or look up to, is how they're doing it is how you want to do it. If you're new to a platform, I don't care what the platform is. If you ask that person what tool they're using, you can make lots of right hooks. If you ask them, what tool are you using? I think 99% of the time they're just going to tell you the tool, because there's no skin off their back. They're paying for it. And no one really, and there's also the way that you can actually look inside of some of these platforms and actually tell what tool someone's using for it, right? So if you go to your favorite Twitter person's account, you can actually oftentimes be able to see inside that tool, was it posted from Hootsuite? Was it posted by Twitter iOS? Was it posted by TweetDeck? Was it posted by Buffer? And I think so not knowing what the right tool is always a problem. I agree. But I say, don't be afraid to ask the people that you think are doing it well. Just say, what tool are you using? I love that you're all of a sudden sharing amazing content. And Kristen might be using Edgar now and brand new, it's, her new favorite one. Well, I wouldn't have known that if I didn't ask Kristen what all of a sudden changed. Your engagement went up. You have more pictures in your tweets. So I'd say that's a takeaway from me is that as many DMs and random things that I have to learn how to say no to, the stuff that I always answer and it doesn't faze me is I will happily promote the tools and things that I'm using, because how are we all going to learn how to do it better if we don't share the stuff that's working for us? So that would be my takeaway, and just kind of a lesson learned for those that are watching this now or the replay. There's so many tools, so many different things, but if you find someone, don't be afraid to ask them.
That's right.
Completely agree.
Nobody credible these days tries to pretend they're a wizard and they do it all just by osmosis. Everyone knows it's about leveraging resources.
And everyone uses tools differently, because I think that's one of my favorite things is learning how Kristen uses Hootsuite or how Brian uses Buffer, because they're completely different than the way I use those tools. So.
Well, and I had no idea, like when I first did a demo on Periscope and I just showed my Buffer screen and I went through how I use Buffer, the amount of people that were paying for the $50 account on Buffer that didn't use it the same way as me was like mind blowing, right? And you don't even realize that, or, not using the feature. So I think that's important. If you do have some of those questions about tools, I see a couple of people asking, feel free to tweet us, feel free to tweet the Social Business Hour handle. We all three respond, engage. Mainly it's Miss Kristen Cardos, but I love the dialogue. I love the conversation. Almost 300 people in here throughout the hour. We do have the best community, I feel, on Twitter. It's extremely biased opinion. There are not analytics that I will use to back that up, but it is my own opinion, and I love, every single Monday. Do we have a Blab schedule for next Monday?
Yes.
We do, and the November theme is online harassment. So I'm actually really excited to discuss this. It's highly topical. We'll be talking about a lot of different platforms and all forms of abuse. So it's not just the blatant harassment that we see. There's a lot of passive aggressive stuff that needs to stop. But anyway, we'll get into that next month.
I love it. And those that are tuning in, we are working on a landing page and putting some of the content that's out there in one home. But if you're not following, make sure to follow the Social Business Hour handle. Also, if you click on it, we have all of our videos for this show, Blab, as well as pre-Blab, which is kind of funny. That's a thing. Pre-Blab, when we are Google Hangouts, we have all of those videos up there on YouTube under Social Business Hour. So if you want to see us, we had Andrew Jenkins who jumped on. We interviewed him almost 2 years ago. His interview is up there archived for you guys to listen and engage to. You have ones from all, we talked Instagram 2 months ago. Last month we talked influencers, and we talked tools, right? We talked tools and influencer marketing and those things. So feel free to jump in, watch any of that content, share it out, use the hashtag SBizHour. And then we'll be back next week. I'll be in Las Vegas. So I will be joining from the wonderful Sin City there in Las Vegas. So thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Kristen. You guys rocked. Cheers, everyone.
Have a good week, everyone.
All right, we are live. Welcome to Social Business Hour. It is October 19th. We are, as always, a Twitter chat and now a Blab. I am Brian Fanzo, better known as iSocialFans on the Twitters, joined every single Monday for almost 2 years by my co-host, Miss Rachel Miller. How are you today, Rachel?
Hey, everyone. Hey, Brian. Welcome, Kevin. I'm awesome. I love Mondays, so I couldn't be more stoked to be here.
Awesome. I love it. So those of you that are tuning in, we have Periscope Live. We have Blab going on right now. Of course, we will be also posting the questions and engaging on Twitter. This conversation started as a Twitter chat. It was a show that Rachel and I started almost 2 years ago with the idea that we wanted to help turn a Twitter chat into give actionable takeaways for those that are in the social business space, either a business owner, a social media marketer, someone that's in this area. So we're excited every single Monday to be here, excited to bring this conversation. We've been on Blab for almost 2 months now and couldn't be more excited. Shout out to Blab. They had a huge announcement today that they teamed up with Product Hunt, and now all of Product Hunt's interviews are actually being using the Blab technology, which I think as a evangelist for live streaming, it's a good day for live streaming for that alone. But we're going to jump into the show. As always, use the hashtag SBizHour on Twitter, or answer the questions as we bring them into you now. So I'm excited. For everybody that tunes in this show, they know that my allegiance and my love for one company, there's the swag side, is Buffer. I've been a big fan of Buffer beyond the tool, but because it's a great community, pushing boundaries when it comes to how a company and a brand grows, the idea of transparency, the idea of empowering great employees to do great things, and then also just letting them be great. And Kevin, I'm going to talk you up, and I promise you, I don't do it for every guest, and you can watch every one. But Kevin is our guest today from Buffer, and without question, there is nobody else's blogs that if a blog goes live, that will stop me in my tracks, and I will read it instantly. Now, usually I need a notepad and a nice drink because it's detail-oriented and elaborate as hell. But Kevin, it's truly excited to have you on the show. Of course, big fan of your work. And the fact that we get to bring your knowledge and insights to this topic to the world, I couldn't be more excited. So go ahead and introduce yourself, let people know who you are, and we'll get started with some of the questions.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. This is going to be fun. I'm Kevin. I write for Buffer. You can catch anything I write on the social blog, which is blog.bufferapp.com. We do all sorts of social media tips and strategies and different things like that. And just super fun to share kind of what we're experimenting with on social media and what we're learning. So looking forward to learning from you, Brian, and Rachel today and sharing some of the stuff that we've tried ourselves.
I love it. And I think, it's interesting because, I'm a computer science guy. I came from that background. Rachel is definitely, has been in the social selling space, the CRM space, is the chief listener. And part of the thing with this show when we kind of started it was, how do we simplify things, but at the same time provide action and don't go fluff, right? It's a very difficult, kind of balance to make. And I think, I like to say that on my resume, my biggest skill set is that I can translate geek speak, in the sense that I can turn some of this confusing language into stuff that people can relate to, they can take away. And I'm excited because I think you do an amazing job of that. And we're going to start it off with question one. When we're talking the definition of social media analytics, I think it's changed drastically over the years. But what are your thoughts? What does social media analytics mean to you?
Yeah, I think there's a few things that come to mind. Probably at the most basic level, it's clicks and retweets and favorites and replies and comments, kind of the basic engagement stats that you might have. I would imagine there's some deeper layers too, and I might not be quite the expert to share on some of those, but I think you can get into lots of cool stuff like more like insight driven learnings from analytics. So you have kind of the basic engagement, and then it's like, well, what does this mean? Why is this happening? What can I take away from this and spin forward into an actionable takeaway? And that's the part I'm quite excited to learn about even more. Also just kind of like layering different stats on top of each other and seeing where to go forward from there. So I don't have very good language to describe them just yet, but it's fun to kind of just share what we're noticing and experimenting with and kind of take it from there.
All right, I'm manning multiple channels. So, Rachel, I'm curious from your spot when you're talking analytics. I think I love Kevin kind of keeping it basic, but at the same time, there's an element of really analytics that I feel analytics that are transforming how people are doing business, and then analytics that really reassure or just confirm what people already believe, right? And there's like kind of an interesting play. I mean, things like Facebook organic reach, like no one cared about Facebook organic reach until they took it away. And then all of a sudden that was an analytic, that was a stat and something you're like, wait a second, I need to have paid reach. But Rachel, what are your thoughts kind of on that definition of social media analytics?
Yeah, I think, ultimately we want to collect data to make smarter business decisions. So it's super easy to assume that social media analytics is just about, your engagement metrics. But I think when you dive deeper, it's all about knowing your audience. And there are a lot of tools out there now that at the click of a button, you can find out, who they are, where they're from, which tweets they're engaging with. And I think that's a big part of the analytics that everyone needs to take note of. It's not just how many times something's being retweeted, but who exactly is retweeting it, and the bigger picture of that and what that means.
No, and I think that's interesting. And Kevin, I think, for me, analytics was always something that I felt like I loved and it helped me grow. But when you brought up analytics, especially social media, it made the social media people feel like they could talk about it and stand out from the crowd. And the everyday business owner, the everyday, person that's a creator that doesn't want to do marketing for a living really got scared about what analytics meant and what data meant and this whole idea. But I think it's changed. And I think Buffer is actually part of the reason I promote Buffer's tool, and I am not paid to promote it at all. And it's just a tool that I love to use, is in the sense that it simplified analytics by including it in the tool, but didn't give you too much options and too many things that kind of go down random rabbit holes. So I'm curious, when you're writing and you're focusing on, what analytics makes sense and how to talk about it, do you kind of have like a thought process on like, where's your common level, like ground of knowledge? Or do you have like a area where you write at that says, I want to make sure this knowledgeable person can get this takeaway from this analytics, but I can't play to the person that has no idea the difference between a retweet and a quote retweet, but I can't also play the difference between someone that's using IBM Watson. How do you kind of handle the variety of consumers of social media analytics?
Yeah, that's a great one. It reminds me a lot of my personal journey with analytics too, maybe like within the Buffer app itself. There's if you use Buffer, you might notice in kind of when you review the analytics side, it lists all the different posts you've sent recently. And every so often you'll see this little badge that says top tweet or top update. And it's just a little, I don't know, I feel like it's a little high five to me when I do something well. It's just great. And I think when I first started with social media, that was what I noticed was, oh, this is a top tweet. This is a top update. The next layer beyond that was, oh, well, why is this a top tweet? Why is this a top update? What went right here that maybe I could do differently? I could do more moving forward. So I try to take that mindset into writing about it too. I want to say, and I don't know if I pull this off quite as well as I might think I do, but I almost think you can talk to each layer of people and kind of their experience level with analytics within the same post. So a lot of times that comes back to not making any assumptions that people know what I'm talking about. So being very clear and descriptive about just the basics of where to find such and such a stat, or what I mean when I say the word engagement. So defining the terms that I use is kind of the first step. And once people can see that, that's great. Then you can kind of go, so this is what I'm saying. This is what it means. This is how to apply it for yourself. I think that's kind of the 3 different layers that I try to write to when the topic comes up. And that's kind of been my personal journey with analytics as well.
So is your background in this space, like from a standpoint, I mean, what are you a tech guy to begin with? Give us a little bit of context there before we jump into the next question.
For sure. Yeah, not a tech guy at all. I'm a journalism major originally and worked with newspapers and kind of the print media for a long time, and came into blogging kind of through that channel, and have loved it ever since. I spent a couple of years as an accounting major, so that might be where any of the analytics side snuck in there. But yeah, I've always enjoyed numbers, I guess, and it's cool to kind of see the convergence on social media in particular.
Accounting to journalism? Did I hear that correctly?
Yeah, you did. I like to say I started in accounting because it's alphabetically the first major on the list. So I was just like, oh, that's easy. It was a cool decision, I guess. Accounting is a very safe career choice in a lot of ways because it pays well, and there's always accountants out there. And I think that appealed to me a lot at the time. And then kind of in school, realized it wasn't where my passion lied. So I'm grateful for the chance to have been able to pursue my passion a bit more fully.
No, I love it. I love it. And for those that are watching now or just jumping in, I see we have some new faces in, about 71 watching now on Blab. We are following the hashtag SBizHour on Twitter. So if you feel like you need to open a second tab, jump onto Twitter and engage there. There's lots of great conversation out there. I see a bunch of brands in there. So kudos to those brands that are doing good social listening. And I wanted to read, Mike Roseman said, social analytics, not just reach, clicks, and conversions, but a way to get to know and better engage your audience. And I think that is awesome. I actually love studying my analytics on tweets that have no links. And that might surprise a lot of people. But for me, I love kind of understanding what kind of conversation or post creates dialogue, it doesn't have to be, I'm a big fan of images. And of course, Pablo 2.0 just came out. So now we can actually even create a little bit better images on Twitter. But I love sometimes it always seems like analytics are links through, clicks through and call to action and forcing someone into another channel. And I love that Mike said that, because to me, it also it's how you test, tweak, and learn that the story you're telling is resonating with your audience. If you're not looking at those analytics, how the hell do you know, other than thinking in your own head, that's what they want to consume? And to me, I think that's kind of the secret. The people that are learning how to really engage and move with the change are those that are looking at these analytics across the board.
And that's a great point. We noticed recently, we kind of looked at some of the best posts sent through Buffer, and a lot of them, probably the majority of them, don't have links. They're just photos or text updates and just people connecting in that way. So that's a really cool point.
No, I love it. It's one of my favorite things when I see like my most popular tweet for the last 30 days, and it's one that was not like a one. It was an unexpected, right? It's a pleasure
Yeah.
one that said a comment or an insight. But Rachel, you have other things going on here. We want to jump to question two.
Let's do question two, because I have strong feelings about best practices. So I'm curious to hear what Kevin has to say.
Maybe you should go first, Rachel. I'm curious to hear what you have to say.
No, the guest always goes first. I reserve
no.
that right as a host. Okay, so question two, including best practices in a post title is very effective clickbait. I click every time. But who truly determines what is and is not a best practice?
Yeah, that's a good one. I really am curious to hear your thoughts on this too, to learn from you. We often, and we totally use best practices in a lot of our headlines also. Kind of that best practices phrase is a great one. From what I can gather, I think I have a couple of thoughts on that. Best practices to me don't really mean maybe best practices in general. It's more just like, this works for a lot of people. It's more of like a starting point for my own experiments in a lot of ways. So I take that best practices term as kind of a jumping point for experimentation. And best practices for me are what works for me and what works for Buffer, and those become our best practices on an individual basis. And that's backed by data and benchmarking and kind of these longer term views of what's worked over time. I want to say that's kind of what we come at when we use that phrase in our headlines. Is it's usually data or statistics that we're reporting on that have like a study behind them or a bunch of research behind them, where it's something that's worked well for people over a course of time. I think one of the pitfalls with that is that often by the time you collect all that data and analyze it and report on it, it's a few months or a year later and things might have changed again. So it's always a tricky place, which is kind of why I tend to take the experimentation angle with it.
So what say you, Rachel Miller?
No, I agree. I think with what Kevin's saying, and ultimately it's a baseline that you can use to build your own guidelines, I guess, because ultimately my best practices are different than yours. They're different from Kevin's. They're different to everybody here listening today. I think people need to not take those articles verbatim because things vary by industry, by region, obviously your target audience, your customer persona. I mean, there's so many variables. So while it's always great to do your research, and I'm an avid reader, best practices, I'm more of a best fit. That's like kind of when we're building out the topic for today. Like best fit, I think, is the way people are going to move forward because it's the best fit for you, that personalization. So that's
I think it's interesting because I think, for me, this is probably one of those questions like, I get the ridiculousness of like, what's the best time to Periscope? What's the best time to engage on Twitter? What's the best time? And, and I always kind of reply back with like, which might sound very cliche or very me not wanting to answer a question. I'm like, well, the best time is unique for everybody's audience. Right. And I make that statement. But I also believe that, I can't stand when someone tells me, Brian, I took exactly what they said in this blog post and I implemented it, but I can't stand out from the noise. And you're like, you will never stand out from the noise if you are doing the exact same thing everybody else is. And I think part of it is listening, learning what other people are doing well, and then adapting it to your own best practices. So for me on analytics, especially, I love to take analytics, dissect it, what matters to me, and then share my point of view from a very very one of my point of view. But Kevin, on Buffer, with Buffer Social especially, you're going to have to play that to the broader audience, the small business, the medium-sized business, and all of these different groups. So I'm curious, when you're doing that and you're kind of focusing on best practices, do you have like a private Twitter list of thought leaders that you kind of look at? Where is your like Bible or focus on people that that if they're doing it, that I'm at least on the right track or kind of focusing in the right area?
Yeah, I think we kind of gain a lot of inspiration from some of the other startups in our space. So kind of like the Moz and the Unbounced, those places, both what they're doing on social media, and then also kind of what they're sharing on their blog and the way they're doing their blog posts. That's often where we kind of go for our inspiration and to learn from them what best practices are for them. I feel like we have a lot of audience overlap, which is really great. It's almost like some bonus analytics that we don't have to do ourselves, can just kind of learn from them in their space. And I think like Facebook's Insights tool has been great because it lets you kind of track some different pages as well. So you can see some of the stats behind other pages even. And just lots of different ways to learn, which is really great.
Well, and I think another thing that's really interesting from a sense of what you guys are doing is you just posted a blog post. I think it was 2 blog posts ago for you on you guys are reinventing your blog and you're taking another look at it. What's giving you, is it the trust in management and the trust in your leadership at Buffer that's allowing you guys, I think this isn't a social media tool conversation. This is a willing to embrace change and push the boundaries. And I think the idea that I feel the Buffer social blog is one of the best blogs out there without question as far as quality content, consistency. It's always original. It's always unique. But the fact that you're now, posted this blog and you're taking a new look at it and you're going to test and tweak things, what's giving you guys that kind of confidence to do that? Is it the community? Give me some insights into that. Because I think our audience oftentimes builds a blog because everybody tells them to, and they're afraid to take that push forward and change before change approaches them. And I would love to know kind of the thought process on how that works. Yeah,
that's a great one too. I think a lot of it comes back to the Buffer culture of just kind of being open to experimentation and self-improvement and trying new things. And for us, that's kind of where a lot of this experimentation starts. We did an experiment a few months back where we didn't publish any new content on the blog for 30 days. And just like a wild and crazy thing, like probably more of a half-baked idea when it started than it probably should have been. But, we ended up trying it and it did really well for us. We learned a lot from it. I think if I can reflect back on before my time at Buffer, I was very cautious to make mistakes or to take risks. And I think my caution around risk taking was probably because I might make mistakes, and mistakes, I was kind of always averse to them. And since joining Buffer, I think we've really embraced this idea that mistakes are opportunities to learn. And with that mindset, sure, we can completely change around the blog, which is our best marketing asset, and see if something happens. If it doesn't work out that way, then we will have at least learned tons from that experience and can kind of go back and back to what worked before. And I think just kind of having that mindset of being okay to fail in a lot of ways, being okay not to know answers and to pursue answers, I think that alone sets us apart in some ways in terms of content and marketing, and that we're willing to admit that we don't know stuff and to go find it out and report back. And that's where a lot of the fun comes in for me too, is being able to experiment in that way. And when I joined Buffer, I wasn't on Twitter before I joined Buffer. I wasn't on Facebook. I wasn't anywhere. And so I didn't know anything. So I'm glad I didn't have to pretend that I did. From day one, it was just all about exploration. And that kind of continues to be the case for us.
Very cool. Do you have any cool questions from the audience, Brian?
Yeah, I saw Ursula jumped in and said, analytics help you decide if your content resonates with your audience. And then Christina had put, listen and learn from what others are doing, but adapt to your business. There is no one size fits all rules in social. And I think that is, extremely key. Even someone that's writing content or studying other content, Rachel, we talked about Rival IQ being a tool we both love to study and track other people. And for me, most of the time, I'm studying and tracking just so I know what they're doing, not to copy it. And I think people also look at that from like competitive analysis when it comes to social media analytics. They're like, well, why would I do that? Because I'm never going to be unique. And to me, it's a little bit of, well, how do you know what you don't know until you do? And then you're able to kind of adapt and kind of pick kind of how things go. So I think it's a very interesting conversation out there. I did post that we'll be able to open up some questions. I do see some questions floating through the audience. So if you're watching this on Twitter or on Blab or Periscope, we'll make sure to bring in some of your questions too. But you want to jump into the next question, Rachel?
Yeah. This one, I think we're all in agreement that you can't really be successful on social without cool content. So we need folks like Kevin to produce cool content. So I'm really curious to know what tactics you've learned through your experiments, obviously being new to social and your amazing blogs. How are you making data interesting? Like, how are your posts a success for Buffer? Like, obviously you have a very unique style. They all look the same. We all know that, but it works. So, how did you come by that template that you use?
Yeah, that's a great one. I think that took a bit of fine tuning also. And we've gone through a few cosmetic changes to the blog too, which has kind of shaped some of the look and feel of those. I think early on when I joined Buffer, I was really grateful to have some wonderful leadership with Leo, who's kind of Buffer's co-founder, and then also Courtney, who's really key on the marketing side for us as well. And I had the great chance to learn from Courtney a lot, specifically on the blog stuff. And we kind of went down this path of really focusing on visuals early on and making sure that posts had a lot of visual pop and appeal to them. It was really interesting where that started with Buffer used to have a feature within the tool called content suggestions, and Courtney had the wonderful, amazing responsibility to go out there and find good content to share with everyone every day. And within that process of looking for great content, like she was looking for stuff to share, and oftentimes she'd find really wonderful articles, but nothing really to click on or to share or to add to a tweet to make it visually interesting. And that learning was kind of brought back to us, and was like, well, let's make sure all of our posts are that way, and how will this set us apart? So that was kind of where some of the images came from. I think now we have kind of an introductory paragraph. We have a header image that is optimized for Twitter sharing, and then the body of the content below, and try to get as many visuals in there as possible, and in as many visuals that are self-explanatory as possible. So charts and graphs with certain headings, icons and visuals that kind of tell the story without needing the extra text to tell the story. So that's kind of where the design side of it came in. We do kind of at the top, we do some sort of copywriting formula to kick things off. In terms of introductions, I go back and forth on them, especially with Buffer blog posts. I feel like if you click on a headline, you kind of know what to expect. And if you click on a headline of a Buffer blog post, you might not even necessarily need the introduction. You might just hop down into the content and just kind of grab the headings that catch your eye and go from there, which is totally fine. And that's kind of why we designed the blog post the way we do, because we know that there's lots to read out there, lots to read within a single blog post even. So yeah, we kind of do a copywriting formula for the intro. We do the headings, we do H2 and H3 headings throughout so people can grab the stuff that appeals to them. We found that a lot of times those headings work great as tweets and social media updates themselves. So it's easy to just highlight a bunch of text there and buffer it out into your queue. And yeah, then try like voice and tone wise to make it as open and non-certain as possible, as uncertain as possible, which sounds kind of, I know that sounds always funny to say. Like, one of the goals that we have with our content is to not express certainty with anything. And that's very maybe counterintuitive to a writer, and a writer of, I don't know, like an educator, teacher type of writer where you're explaining a concept to someone. But I don't think we believe for a second that we have the final answer on anything. So it's always nice to carry that forward into the content as well.
You know, it's funny. I remember Leo telling me that the first time, and it was one of those things where I was like, what? You guys don't do that? I remember getting off the Skype with Leo and going back and reading through some of the blogs and being like, how is that possible? Like, I mean, Buffer's shaping, you know, and I see a bunch of people saying that they're going to watch the replay just to take notes. And, you know, and I think it's also a really interesting, I want to say the Buffer suggestions were I believe content curation is one of the most underrated skills when it comes to doing it really well, finding stuff that not everyone has seen, sharing it in a way that not everybody has seen shared, and also providing it in a timely manner. And I was kind of sad to see suggestions go away. I understood the principle of why it went away, and it kind of goes a little counterintuitive to what Buffer's kind of mantra and values are and what they're trying to lead forward. I would love to see, and this is a shout out, you can tell Courtney from my notes, and I'll probably tweet her it anyhow. I would love to know some of the tools and secrets she was using for finding some of that indiscoverable content. Because I was sitting with Jay Bear one time. I go, Jay, I can't find this content. It's like this. There was 12 posts up there, and I said, Jay, your post is up here, and your post hadn't even come in my RSS feed yet. And Courtney had found it and populated it and Buffer suggestions. But I think that's it's a great skill or a great lesson that people need to understand, is that content curation also plays into content curation, and the idea where it kind of goes back and forth, where if you're able to find great content that's relative to your audience, it definitely helps you write great content that is relative to your audience. And I thought that Suggestions app demonstrated that Buffer could play on both sides of the line. I do remember like keeping on my app and seeing every update, and it wasn't removed, and then it unfortunately it went away. But no, I love a lot of the conversation going on here. Rachel, anything that jumps out on you so far?
No, I just wanted to say that I think with content curation, and I think people often forget this and they get stressed out, is that they share things once. And that's what I think one of my favorite things with Buffer is the ability to go through your top tweets and you rebuffer them because they were top tweets for a reason. And you're also sharing that article out to new people, because you can't expect many people in your network to see that article the first time. So I shared things out probably hundreds of times. If it's something that I stand behind and I love the article, I also advocate reading everything before you share it. I think that's great that Buffer kind of coaches people into re-sharing the same piece, because you don't need to stress out about finding 25 pieces of new content every day to share. So it makes your curation process so much simpler.
So I'm curious, for me, when we're talking about best fit solution and strategy and really how you kind of talk analytics, social is changing. It changes faster than I believe. Right now we're at a pace of change that's unlike anything else, right? You would, in February of this year, you would have never known that live streaming hashtags would own the Twitter feed if you're following those ones. We wouldn't know where these conversations would go. So I think I love this question that I'm going to throw out there right now, but I'm curious, I'd love to hear your thoughts and just kind of how you guys handle when you're talking best fit solution or strategy, like what does that mean to you and how does that kind of fit into your mindset when you're talking social media as well as analytics?
Yeah, I love that question. And maybe Brian, I don't know if I fully understand what best fit means even. How would you define the term best fit?
Well, Rachel, you want to elaborate a little bit on that, on where you were thinking? Because I think for me, best fit also kind of understanding where I believe that you should always have a strategy and a plan and a course of action, but you should also be ready at a wit's moment to throw your strategy out the window because something came in, a content piece changed. I keep BuzzSumo notifications up on my computer, and as soon as something starts trending that was not predicted, it gives me a notification because I want to know all of a sudden if I have to throw out my social strategy for the day and approach it, start talking about Twitter moments, because that feature wasn't something I knew was coming out. But what are your thoughts, Rachel, on that whole best fit versus strategy?
Well, I think best fit solution or strategy for me is just really being honest with yourself and taking the time to, okay, what are your business goals? And then doing research on what tools and strategies are going to help you reach them. I think people are too easily coaxed into the big box name brand solution when it's not going to be the best fit for them. So I think it's, finding out your toolkit might contain 12 tools, mine might have 4, but those are best fit for you. And I think that's okay. I think it's just that hyper personalization and really focusing on what your unique goals are, for me is best fit. And that's why I'm happy to see people CRM, that's kind of my background. So, a lot of tools are hyper focused now. You can have CRM specifically for your fitness industry. You own a gym, there's a CRM just for you versus the Salesforces of the world who you could use, but it's not going to be the best fit. I think you can apply that same approach to everything. So best fit for my content curation is different than yours. So experiment.
That's great. We've seen that especially be the case for social media too. I think a lot of times we hear from people that they join social media and just join, the 4, 5, 6 major ones and try to do all of them well. And some of our advice sometimes is to choose the ones that will suit you best and that fit you best. And I think that's, it sounds like exactly what you're talking about with best fit in terms of all sorts of different ways within online marketing. And I think social media in particular is one that we felt it quite acutely. I've noticed in myself, I don't use Facebook as much as I should. And I feel like I should be using Facebook because it's so huge and there's so many people on there and there's so many opportunities. And for some reason, it's never fit for me. And accepting that and being okay with that has taken time. And I think I'm getting there. I'm still trying to brainstorm different strategies I might try or different parts of myself I could share there. But settling into more of a groove with Twitter and LinkedIn versus Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, Pinterest, trying to do all these things really well. Just kind of recognizing my own limitations and strengths has been really helpful and love the way that best fit fits with that.
Yeah, I think people, especially speaking of social networks, I think we are, almost expected to be everywhere. But if you look at people who are doing social well that you might admire, they're rock stars on probably one platform. And they're okay on others, but it's you don't have to be on Facebook. Other people are and they're rocking it. But that's not my platform. Twitter for me, that's my home. So I think that's for me been super integral. But yeah, find that best fit and then just own it. I don't think you need to own everything.
I have to say, this is probably one of the few blabs where you'll see that there's 2 people that aren't giant Facebook fans. I'm a huge Facebook fan, personal side and other side. But I agree. And I see a lot of people talking about, not being everywhere, not trying to understand everything. And I think it plays perfectly into our last question. And we're going to bring in a couple of questions from people that are asking a lot of the dialogue around here. But I also feel that, what Buffer has done really well is it simplifies sharing. But for those of you that don't realize it, and this is something that I think other tools haven't fully embraced yet, is that if you click on, for me, I'm sharing a piece of content. and I click on it to share it to my iSocial Twitter account, and I have 12 other Twitter accounts, then I click on my LinkedIn account and my Facebook account, it actually prompts you to customize the message, and the content is shown in a different way for each of those platforms. Now, early day Buffer did not. That's a newer feature in Buffer. But I think that is actually a trend and a tell that really analytics does work. Because I've had people tell me, Brian, the reason I don't love Facebook is because the content I share there just doesn't work. And I was like, well, you don't really share content there. You repost your tweets, and like it's a different crafting a message, and it's it's a different kind of caveat. So I think that's an interesting piece. How does Buffer look on like the full content sharing when it comes to social media analytics? Like, because right now in Buffer, you're looking at your most posts and your things that are all siloed by platform, and actually by platform and user account, right? Is that something that you see a lot of a trend? I'm a huge Moz fan as well, so I know Moz's thoughts on that. But what are your thoughts there on when people are looking at social media analytics? Should it be social media analytics, or should it be analytics broken down by platforms and then kind of building the variable data that makes sense into a better story? Because I think that's kind of a half the industry feels one way, other half the industry feels the other way.
Yeah, that's a great one. I think I'm with you on kind of the different messages for different platforms, and it's like comparing apples to oranges in a lot of ways. I remember reading some really great analytics posts about like how to compare performance across different social networks, and I find that really cool personally, like dividing engagement by followers and get like a per follower engagement count. That way you can track it back and forth. And I mean, that's really cool. And that works great for comparing that way. I'm maybe more of the mind that it's not maybe best to compare Facebook to Twitter to Instagram to Pinterest. Like just even thinking through the ways those different social networks work. I think when we brought Pinterest into Buffer, and you're able to schedule pins and things like that now, I tried to when I tried to write Pinterest posts, they just turned out terrible and awful. And I apologize if they actually ended up being published. I don't think they were useful at all, but I was trying to wedge what I knew about Twitter and Facebook into Pinterest, and it didn't work. Like it's vastly different and just too different to kind of cookie cutter everything into the same network. And I think the same thing happens with the marketing that you do and the messages that you write, where it's tough to write the same single message and send it to 4 or 5 different places and receive good engagement in every place. It might work a few times, but overall, I think people are very wise to notice when things feel off. And for brands especially, I think that radar is just a bit more sensitive to anything that doesn't quite feel right. And breaking the message apart, do it in different places is super helpful. I think Buffer will continue to go down that path as a product to kind of focus more on individual messages for individual networks. And one of the interesting things, and I'd love your all's thoughts on this too, is like that takes a bit of extra time, right? Like if you can do one message in all 4 places, you've saved a ton of time. But if you have 4 different messages for the same thing, like that adds a bit of time. And maybe that goes back to the best fit, where instead of being everywhere because it saves you time, now you're more conscious about where your time is and how much time it takes to be on every network. And maybe that will kind of improve the experience for everyone there.
No, I love that. And I think it's also kind of comes down to a little bit of that idea of adapting and also, understanding your audience. Like one of the things for me is I love running analytics on Twitter. So I can tell you that, 62% of my audience is male. And I can tell you the average household income of my audience is, and I do that on Twitter. And then people would come to me and like, what's that on Facebook for you? And I'm like, I don't know. And they're like, what? I'm like, well, my strategy and my sharing and my content and my goals on Facebook don't require me to know that information, that knowledge. And I think oftentimes asking the right question is uber important, but asking it on the right platform in social media could be even more important. Because if you all of a sudden, and I actually saw this for a company that I worked with and I went back to consult with, they had an agency that actually promoted and said they would get the same amount of engagement on a tweet as they would on a LinkedIn post. And to me, I mean, something like that is what kind of puts social media in like a weird light where, it just doesn't work like that. So I think it's really interesting. So I'm curious, we'll jump into question 5 and let some people jump into that open seat there and ask some questions. But when we're talking about a business being successful, is it possible to do that without having an eye on social media analytics across the board? I love this question, Rach. I give credit. All these awesome questions are all the handyman work of Rachel Miller there. So Rachel is crushing it with these questions. I was even racking my brain as she was putting them in the Google Doc. So I would love to hear your thoughts on that side. So can a business be successful without keeping an eye on analytics?
I think, sorry, my son just woke up. So this might be my last question, if that's all right. And we can let you two take
Okay,
it.
no worries. But we can jump in from there.
No, that's
yeah,
cool.
So go. I'm just curious your thoughts there.
Yeah, I think I think it's really cool. He spotted my microphone here. I use the pretend microphone for this one.
Nice.
I think it's really cool. Do you want to come over here?
Yeah.
We can talk together.
All right.
Here we go.
A mini.
All right. I think it's probably going to be very tough to not focus on analytics as a business, and I feel bad saying that because I think analytics can be a term that does scare a few people off, and you hear analytics and you think, oh man, I have to learn data and numbers and math and all this stuff. And I know I personally, my heartbeat races a bit when I hear that term still to this day. And I think there's some ways to do it where you don't have to know everything. Like you said, Ryan, like you don't have to know the demographics on all 4 networks if it's not important to kind of your strategy and things. So just being purposeful when you get into it about what you want out of the network and what stats will be important for when those strategies come into place. I think that's a key learning kind of ahead of time, to know what you want to get out of it and which stats fit with that. But overall, I'd encourage businesses to take a look and see, and to be able to learn from it. Love the fact that you all tied audience into that too. I think that's a key one. Yeah, I think that covers it. Sorry, it's probably a rambly answer.
No, I love it. And I love that, you're able to work in being a dad. We're both parents as well. And spending some time, I know, balancing time, work and kids is always entertaining. I was having lunch with my daughters that are home right now, just before I jumped on. So I appreciate you jumping on 100%. I know you have to go take care of that stuff, but we're big fans. We really like your insights. For those that are listening, we'll stick around, ask some questions, do some dialogue. Maybe you can send some tweets towards Kevin that he can answer and engage with afterwards. But truly do appreciate your time, Kevin, and we'll definitely have you on again and kind of continue the conversation.
That'd be great. Thanks so much, Brian. Thanks, Rachel. This has been fun.
Thanks, Kevin. Have a good one. All right, Rachel. So I think part of the dialogue that I saw here, to me, I think what I think has made, Kevin a big fan of Kevin was that, he's breaking down analytics, but doing it in a way that he knows what the common criteria is, knows what people are talking about, but also not afraid to, like he said, fail. I loved hearing that backstory. So, what are your thoughts there? And we're going to leave that seat open down below. So feel free to click on that. I'll get to everybody who's jumping in there right now, and I'll bring you on air. Would love to hear your conversation on really social media analytics. This is something, of course, super close to Rachel, your and I's focus on what we do with brands as well as personal brand.
No, and I think kind of what Kevin mentioned quickly was the tone of the blog. And I think that's what really sets it apart from other blogs, is that they're not coming at you like they're the expert, it's their way or no way. It's truly a conversation. And I think that's my favorite thing when I'm reading a Buffer post, is that you feel like they're exploring with you. Like we're all in it together, we're learning, and they're cool to say that, next week, oh, this changed. So, this is now the best practice, or this is the tip of the week that might truly be different than last week. So I think that's the coolest part for me.
No, I agree completely. Hi, Ralph. How's it going? You have a comment or question?
Nope.
Oh, guess he doesn't. All right. So yeah, if you're willing to jump in there, feel free to hit the button down below. So, and this is something, this is for those that don't know about the values at Buffer. So these are the values at Buffer. I don't know if you guys can read them. I'll put a link to it. Actually, it's in a couple of my blog posts. I actually have it on my thing here, but the values of Buffer are: choose positivity, default to transparency, focus on self-improvement, be a no ego doer, listen first, then listen more. I know, Rachel, that's your favorite one. Yep. Communicate with clarity, one that I'm trying to improve on. Make time to reflect, live smarter, not harder, which was one that I had blown up on my board. Show gratitude and do the right thing. So this is one of their swag that they had sent out. But I think that idea of what the reason that they're able to, I think, adapt and allow their, a journalism major to understand, journalism focus and changing the blog. I read that blog post. I must have read it twice when they were like, they're changing the blog. Because I remember when they went offline for 30 days and it was just an experiment. And for me, I kept refreshing my RSS feed and like, it must be broke. Like, why is my Buffer content not coming into my Flipboard? So I think the idea that you're able to test, tweak, and adjust is because they kind of started with the values to begin with and great people. So I really appreciate Kevin's time. And I know Carolyn had jumped in here last week and kind of was enjoying the conversation there. So we're bringing some more of these questions and conversations I see going on. Alex Plaxton had said, analytics are the key to creating a valuable strategy, whether for business or your personal brand. Good strategy equals success. What are your thoughts on that, Rach?
Completely agree. I think a lot of people go wrong. They don't have a strategy, or they try to reach too many goals. I think it's easy to say you want to do 12 different things, but ultimately we can really only tackle one or two things at a time. So a strong strategy for me is in phases. So you can roll out phase one, here are your two short-term, long-term goals. And it builds out your process, and it makes it super easy. You do everything incrementally. You have small wins, keeps you motivated. So.
Oh, and we have actually the one who pinch hit for Cloud Talk, my co-host for Cloud Talk last week when Ian jumped in. Ian, how's it going, my friend?
Things are going well. How are you guys?
Doing good.
Doing good. I get to see you in a couple of days, right? I'll get to see you in Vegas and at the end of the week. I'm
getting ready for it. My kids are 13 and soon to be 9, so they're not sitting on my lap anymore. But I love that Kevin's son was sitting on his lap. That is why Buffer is awesome, because I think the key point that regardless of what tool you use is that it's never about the technology, it's about what the technology empowers. And I think you guys are hitting that point out of the park.
No, I couldn't agree more. And I think that's actually part of the, everybody says they care about their employees, but you care about their quality of life enough to let them focus on what they're about. I love watching the Buffer retreats and the fact they go around the world and they let their employees live and work wherever they want, but they bring them together because they understand the importance of offline engagement and collaborating and that team economy. But that doesn't mean you have to force someone to live in San Francisco in a tiny little, shoebox of an apartment only for the reason that you feel that you can control them if they're under your roof. And I love that Buffer's pushing that boundary of doing that. And they're also doing that in a tool and a blog perspective as well.
So we can even say that best fit has nothing to do with location.
Absolutely.
Aptitude, attitude.
It's that battle. You brought up a good point, Brian, and Rachel, you've been saying it for as long as I've been seeing you do things. Control and empower, there are two different sides of the fence. If you're looking to control people, you can empower them. If you empower them, you actually collectively have more control. So I think that's a very big thing. So
I love it. So what say you, Ian, on the analytics discussion? I'd love to hear it. You have any thoughts or discussion on this conversation? I think we love to talk the tools and the different pieces, but I think you talk platforms and you talk tools, but if you're not running analytics and tweaking and adjusting, I think you're just playing around with other people's money, throwing away your own money for a lot of purposes. And I know you worked at IBM, you worked with a lot of startups as well. What were your thoughts on today on the discussion?
I just think, with anything, you always need to know what your objectives are, and then you need to determine, have we met them? And in that process, did we do good? Could we do better? And in order to get down that line, you need analytics, because there's no other way to truly understand, did we meet what we intended to do? And if we did, how can we do better next time? So
completely agree, because you can feel really good about something, but unless you look at the numbers, you don't ever really know how well you're doing or how bad.
Exactly. You say, hey, we did a great post, terrific, and 1.7 people read it? What?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But my favorite is time on page. It could have been shared 200 times. That people spend like 2 seconds on the page, and you're like, well, that's a fail.
Right. It's like, wow, that was a terrific headline. That was it.
But
I love when someone says, did you read that blog post? It was our best blog post ever. I was like, oh, what's the analytics on it? Well, no, it was our best one. We put a lot of our work in. It's exactly what we wanted to deliver. And I was like, I think best is actually determined by your audience, not by what you fabricated in your head. But, I love it. Thanks so much, Ian, for jumping on, my friend.
Have a good one, guys.
See you in Vegas. So look at this. We have actually a previous guest of our show hasn't been on in a while. And we have, how are you doing, my friend? Andrew, how are you?
I'm doing well. Sound a little hoarse. I sound worse than I feel, but great to see all of you. And I'm loving what you're doing on Blab. Sorry to have been so absent, but life's been busy but good. And I know it's been the same for you guys.
For sure. Yeah. And I know you were on our show and it was Social Selling Hour for those that are tuning in maybe and going, do these guys create a blab show? This was a Twitter chat. It morphed in slowly into adding video with Google Hangouts. Andrew was actually one of our first guests that actually got the jump on the video side, I believe through the Hangouts initiated. Yep. But, I know you do a lot of social selling. You focus a lot on, doing social with a purpose and intention. And that's how we kind of connected actually. You and Rachel had known each other beforehand. So what were your thoughts? Any major takeaways or things that maybe you wanted to drop in that you thought we hadn't highlighted yet?
Well, a specific mention of Buffer. Recently in conversation with a client, yes, I do a lot of work in the area of social selling, but my company, we have a number of clients that outsource the management of their social media to my firm. And to be able to take them into the Buffer analytics and show them that some of as an example, the tweets that were getting the most clicks, the most action or engagement were the topics that they specialized in. And it was a mixture of content that was complementary to them as well as their own authored content. So as a company that had been reluctant to dip their toe in the water in social, to be able to show them that it was working, was great validation. And my main sponsor there, who's the director of marketing, could go back to her CEO and say, you didn't believe in this a year ago, but through consistent effort, it's paying a dividend. So, and that's one of the great aspects of Buffer. I actually sort of had a question/comment for both of you, and I'm wondering if you're finding from an analytics standpoint, something I'm seeing a lot with some of these clients that we either do strategy work for or we do the outsourced management for, is they're doing, or in conjunction with us, we're doing the analytics. And as I commented earlier in a tweet, the shelf life of a tweet is very, very short. So it means that you need to be sharing more content more frequently over more days. And a lot of organizations at first blush are like, are you sure? And unfortunately, if they're tweeting or posting to Facebook like every other day, you might as well not bother, because the volume of information being distributed that you're up against can prove challenging. So when I say to them, well, you need to be actually a certain number of tweets per day, a certain number of posts for Facebook, and as you were saying, Brian, looking at it on a regular basis to optimize it. And this is just causing them, it's more work than they, I think, were prepared for. And they're not accustomed to curating content from other sources in order to augment their own content, in order to keep that volume up. So anyway, that's sort of this to set the stage. I'm wondering if you're seeing similar experiences with the organizations you're working with. Hope that makes sense.
No doubt. What say you, Rachel?
I'm not sure if tweeting more necessarily will help reach goals. I think a lot of it has to do with crafting the messages appropriately, using the right hashtags.
I agree. I don't mean to suggest like tweeting for tweeting's sake. I mean, tweeting more strategically and then examining it. I mean, you could set up an if this then that and send out 2,000 tweets a day, and you would be doing yourself a disservice. But it's if you run a report on like Social Bro, and any given hour of any given day of any given week, you're only reaching 10% of your audience with a single tweet, as you were describing earlier. Well, that gives me the latitude to send out the same tweet Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. and maybe Thursday afternoon at 3, because the likelihood of my audiences being the same or even overlapping in a modest way is very, very small.
Yeah, I think I audit my audience regularly to see when is the best times. And there are tools that integrate with, Buffer and others that will fire out tweets automatically at the best times for your specific networks. And I do agree with you that if you are going to be on Facebook or have a LinkedIn business page, then you do need to go all in and own it and post more than once a week. You need to solicit that conversation, give people a reason to be interested in you. But yeah, for me, like I'll send out the same piece of content 10 times in a week, but there's 5 different tweets. You wouldn't necessarily know it's even going to the same post. And then with different hashtags shooting out at different times. So it's... Are
you doing that as a bit of an A/B testing for which headline or which hashtags do the best work?
Yeah, and I think over time, like for certain clients, what gets their audience going. So whether it's a must read or, something kind of flashy and that they click on that, or for some audiences, it could be a graphic. Like you do have to initially do kind of a spray approach and see what works. And then you hone in with by looking at the analytics, you work out what's working best, and then you replicate that over and over again.
If you read nothing else today, you must read this. One of those.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's also, like I like to focus on, I like to say it's ABC testing, because I like to focus when, what, and how I'm sharing what I'm sharing. So oftentimes a blog post to me can be shared from a branded account and not amplified once by a employee account. And then one that's, that is shared by an employee account, quote retweeted by a branded account. And the fact that it was originated from an employee account could have an entirely different results. Ultimately, the exact same content was sitting in screen. It's also how it was actually shared and how it was delivered. So I think that's as important as, I also think, your schedule changes. I remember I wrote a blog post 2 years ago and I said, Guy Kawasaki, it has completely lost his mind on Twitter. He tweets when he sleeps. There's no value in that. I now have an amazing audience in Australia and the UK that I share a lot of my quote unquote best content of the day. I schedule that out at night as well, because I want to make sure that it's reading the right audience at the right time. And I think if I had taken the closed-minded approach before of, well, this didn't work, when I posted it at 9, I think that's an interesting one. And I think to your point earlier, Rachel, too often people are still following social sharing rules that worked really well or were the Bible 3 years ago or 2 years ago, or maybe even 1 year ago. And I would challenge all of you to listen and understand your audience today compared to what they were a year ago, because even Twitter fire hose, the amount of people that told us when we started a Twitter chat that we would lose all of our followers and no one would want you to tweet that much in an hour. You're an idiot for doing this. Well, it's about maturing and educating your audience and building a community around it. But eventually people got used to me tweeting 1,200 times a week. Would I suggest that for a brand or other people? Hell no. But what I was able to mature my audience into understanding was kind of the volume I get, which means it's back to our whole point of this whole show was best practices and best fits. If you just look at what I'm doing or just what one brand is doing, I don't believe you can get best fit or best practice. It has to be a breadth of information, and you have to tweak it to your own audience.
Mm-hmm.
So I just remember that follower wonk. That's the tool that I use for.
That's owned by Moz. That's the Moz tool.
Love that tool for analyzing your unique network, find out when's the best time to send out your tweets. And then I recommend looking at sites like Hashtagify and hashtag.org and looking when hashtags are used the most, and then don't use them then.
I was talking to someone, I've been using Nuvi for social media monitoring, or Nuvi out of Utah. Nuvi.
Yep. Yeah, they're in the show. They come visit the show and share analytics on Social Business Hour almost every week. We're fans.
And I've also used Iconosquare for hashtags and research on Instagram. And what was interesting was in the last call with my rep there, she was using Iconosquare to look at hashtags and subset hashtags or tangential hashtags by using Iconosquare for research there, and then reflecting it back through Nuvi. It was kind of an interesting sort of dual purpose or marrying two tools together, which I thought was kind of neat. I just wanted to touch on Brian's point about when people were criticizing Twitter volume and so on. This was my own decision. About a year or so ago, I decided, okay, I'm going to tweet a consistent amount every day, 5 days a week. And it wasn't about more followers for the sake of followers. I wanted a larger audience, but a quality audience and an audience that I built organically, and to see if it could be done organically. And I grew my audience. I doubled it in a year. And then I doubled the content output yet again. And I doubled my audience again in 6 months. And that's my own personal experience. It's my own experiment. But by striving to share quality content from respected sources, but also showing a bit of humanity, because I'll do some stuff in fintech, I'll do some stuff in social media. I've got a film background and a background in menswear, and I'll share stuff about that too. So people get a sense of my personality through it as well. And to Brian's point, that worked for me, and it's not going to work for somebody else, and that's okay.
No, I couldn't agree more. Thanks so much, Andrew, for jumping in, my friend. Hopefully all is well. Hope you feel better than you do sound. Thanks so much.
I'm on the other side of it. You take care now.
All right, thanks. Love that. And we have 2 years worth of guests coming in, and always fun getting people to jump back in. I actually think it's funny. So when you said follower wonk, I ran a follower wonk report this morning. And so I have 27 scheduled tweets a day coming off my personal account. And it actually, based on the data for the last 30 days of understanding what my most successful tweets were, it actually changed 16 of my 29 determined scheduled tweets in Buffer to a different time. And so it's very interesting. And, so it shows the trend, and it shows, I get most engagement between 11:40 a.m. and 12:20 in the afternoon. But then it also showed, and it's like my 1 a.m. engagement of my post is actually extremely high, but it's my least tweeted time. So it actually shifts so the idea to test and tweak. And I think part of this conversation with analytics is you don't have to do all this stuff. But if you're not willing to embrace the power of analytics and data, it's going to be extremely hard to stand out. It's going to be extremely hard to do kind of some of these other things. So what are some of the other things that you saw as takeaways, Rachel, from today's talk, or even this entire month as we've kind of been talking about social media analytics?
I think I just get the overall feeling that nobody really knows what data to track. I think when we were talking with Ian, like at the beginning of the month, like there's so many tools and we all use them, but we don't actually use them to their full capacity. And it's our fault. That's not the tool's fault. And really knowing what's going to move the needle for you. So I love this discussion about best fit and personalization in every sense. I think it's awesome.
Well, and one of the analytics that you kind of brought up, and you kind of did it, you glossed over it a little bit, but I thought it was actually really important, is you were talking about in Buffer, I can actually see how many clicks I get on a link. And those clicks don't matter if the average time on site is 1.1 second, right? And so I think you talked about that, but that data is not here on Buffer. Buffer doesn't provide me the analytics that I have to go into Google Analytics for. I use my own, page on site, SumoMe or any of these tools. I also have been really playing with SumoMe. I know Kristen Cardos, our community manager, is in here too. And Kristen, if you want to jump in that seat and share some of your thoughts, I know you're in the WordPress side and you get in a lot of the community side, but I've actually been studying where some of the heat mapping on analytics, when someone goes on my blog post, where are they clicking? So not only now as it before was, okay, did they click on my tweet? Okay, they clicked on my tweet. Now, did they get to my website? They got to my website. How long are they staying? But where is their first action? Where is their first? Is it the back button? Is it the About Brian button? Or maybe it's the search button, because what I'm providing to them as recent blog posts sucks. And how do you determine that unless you're actually mapping someone's success? And so I love the heat map. But Kristen, I knew you were geeking out, I'm sure, to the conversation. What are your thoughts on some of these analytics and discussion as they're coming across?
Well, I just like hearing about the different tools that people use. And they do have different strengths and different, price points. And there's a lot you have to consider. And again, it goes back to that right fit that you guys were talking about. Because, for example, Nuvi was mentioned. It's awesome. I can't justify the expense of that. So there are a lot of other tools that will get things done for me that are maybe not quite as sophisticated, but they get me the same kind of insight. Tools like Zoom and even hash tracking. And, I love SpiderCube, which I learned about from you, Brian. I really geek out over SpiderCube because you can put in whatever your search criteria are, and then it will create Twitter lists for you. There's no hand jamming involved in that. It can export it to Twitter. So I like that one a lot.
No, I agree. And I think it's interesting, when you're talking about tools also, and I made this comment last week, and it's something that I really believe in. If you're asking what tool is best and you're not explaining what your goal is, your strategy, how much time you're planning on putting into it, not only can I not give you advice on the best tool, I can't even give you the advice on the best price point of your best tool, right? So for me, Buffer has an account. They have a free account. They give you some basics. They give you a $10 account, which is, the one account. And then they go the awesome team account, which is $50 a month. So for me, I've actually, when I was running full team and we were doing all these things in my company, the $50 tool was everything that we were using. Then all of a sudden it was realized that it was like, I'm not taking advantage of some of those extra analytics, diving back, 190 days or 360 days. It's that funny element where people go to Twitter and say, I have to work with somebody that is aligned with, GitHub because I need the entire fire hose. Yet when you ask them what they actually need, it's like this much data that they need only for the last 90 days that you could probably even get from a free tool, yet they want to spend $40,000 on a tool because they're not asking the right questions or setting the stage correctly. So I think that is one for me that more people kind of have to look at when you're looking at tools and analytics.
I'm also a big proponent of the native analytics in most of the social media. I mean, yeah, it may not be wrapped up in a nice bow to tell you what's going on across channels, but you're going to be hard pressed to find more useful information than you would find in, say, Twitter analytics. I mean, I'm a big fan of what they make available in the back end there. And a lot of people, I think, they think if they're not spending money on advertising on Twitter, I don't think they realize what's actually available under the hood, even to someone who doesn't do any ad spend.
I mean, why would they realize Twitter sucks at advertising that or promoting it?
I know.
But yeah, if you're listening to this and if you leave here when we're done, go to analytics.twitter.com, open it up. It's free. Everybody has access to it. It'll tell you your tweet activity for the last 28 days.